Hi, I'm Sal Mercagliano, Associate Professor of History at Campbell University, a former merchant mariner, and an adjunct professor in maritime industry policy. And on this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we're going to take a deep dive into what is going on with global shipping right now, specifically because of the Delta variant of COVID. Now, I have been talking about this for quite a while. This is a video I did way back in June where I talked about the shipping crisis of 2021. I had another video I did back in May where I talked about doing Christmas shopping early. And so one of the things we want to talk about right here is this issue of what is going to happen here with global shipping coming forward. So I'm going to run you through a series of articles. I got a batch of tabs up there, so I apologize. But one of the things that I like to do with this channel is really break down some very complicated and kind of very divergent stories and put them together into a narrative that helps you understand what is going on with global shipping. But more importantly for you, the YouTube watcher who's watching this channel and perhaps sharing it, what does this mean for you going forward? You may have no connection at all with global shipping. You don't think you have any connection, but you do. But what do these divergent stories mean? And what's the impact? So I'm going to run through a couple of these, try to link them together, and give you an idea of what you should be preparing for as we go forward. So first story here, COVID threatens Chinese exports as U.S. struggles to restock inventories. This is from American Shipper, this is Greg Miller. And there's a couple of stories here I want to kind of tag through right here. So again, one of the things we're seeing is an outbreak of the Delta variant in China. It's actually broken out from the quarantine areas of China. The way China handled COVID initially was a big, huge lockdown, locked everybody down, and went into a very tight quarantine period. And then we go into this, but now what we're seeing here is a couple of other issues that are happening here. So for example, there's a follow-up story over in Splash 24/7, shipping braces as China goes into lockdown mode. As China goes into lockdown mode, this means that material heading to the ports for export are not going to be there. This is what we saw way back in March of 2020, when all of a sudden we had a shutdown and all of a sudden things slowed down coming across and there were shortages in certain areas. Add to this, you have the same thing going on in Vietnam and throughout Southeast Asia as the Delta variant of COVID is hitting. This is a much more virulent strain of the disease. Now we know that if you have vaccinations, that you're able to ward this off much easier. But the problem is vaccinations are not large scale. Even in the United States, we don't have more than, 40, 50% of our population vaccinated. In areas where there's very little vaccination, there's the potential for this to spread. And so we're seeing this. We're seeing factory closures, we're seeing lockdowns, and all this means that cargo that would be loading on vessels in East Asia heading to America and Europe are not going to be there. They're not going to have that cargo on board. And add to this, we just had a large typhoon that went through the area. This is hurricane season, typhoon season in the Northern Hemisphere. So we just saw In-fa come through China. It has caused massive disruptions, huge typhoon, China does things big. And so now we have these disruptions. All of this means that the normal flow of goods coming out of Asia is slow. It's slowing down. And that means that the goods coming across are not going to be arriving as we think. Late August, early September, this is the time when you start shipping goods for the holiday season for December, because it takes you that long, literally, to get it. It's 6 to 8 weeks to be getting this stuff on ships out and across to the areas you need it to be. And again, we're talking about In-fa there, right there. We're seeing that. This is from a Container News report right there. And at the same time, we're seeing congestions in American ports. American ports are slammed once again. That little bit of a hurdle there, we thought we got clear of everything, has come back up. I can, take you up to marine traffic and show you the anchorages off LA, Long Beach, Oakland, Seattle, Houston, Savannah, but they're all full. I mean, they're just full of ships, and it's getting worse. And what we're seeing here is a story from Lodestar right here. Forwarders, Angst as carriers switch vessels onto best paying routes. So one of the things we're seeing is ships are being diverted to load this cargo. Even though there's lines to get off, we're seeing the diversion of ships from secondary routes or not primary routes to cover the routes. Basically what we're seeing is the east-west routes. The routes from Asia to Europe and Asia to America are taking priority over north-south routes and inter-theater, intercontinental routes. So for example, one of the areas that's losing out is Australia, New Zealand. I got some Australian, New Zealand fans that watch this. You're going to see shortages because you're not going to see as many ships on that routes. The place that's going to lose the most is Africa. This was a study that just came out by UNCTAD, the UN Trade Association. They looked at this, and Africa is going to suffer greatly because ships are going to be diverted off the African routes to fill these new routes. And so what we're seeing is dislocation of vessels. We're seeing dislocation of trade, all as a result of this outbreak of the Delta variant of COVID in the Far East. Add to that now, we've got the gridlock. This is the story from Greg Miller not too long ago. It's July 30th story. We're talking about the gridlock off the ports. Again, I can give you the marine traffic version of this. You can do it yourself, take a look, but it's the same thing. Vessels are jammed off the anchorages right now, trying to get in and offload. And what we're seeing is record number of vessels, but this also impacts the trade deficit. One of the things we've talked about is these ships want to get off berth as quick as they can, get back, load, and get back. That means they're going to prioritize empty containers over full containers. And what this means is the U.S. trade deficit widens because we cannot get goods onto ships to ship overseas. That's just the pure basis of this. People are not going to pay huge amounts of money for exports of goods that's 2-3 times the value of the cargo, for example. And what's the result? American trade sits on the docks while empty containers go back to go load more stuff to come back. And that's not just in the United States, by the way. It's Europe, it's around the world right now. We're seeing this happening, but we're seeing the evidence of this in our trade deficit here this past June. Meanwhile, cargo surging. Port of Long Beach reported record amount of containers, moved almost 800,000 containers in July, 4.2% increase. We're seeing this in terminals around the United States, this record increase. Same time, rates going through the roof. Why are rates going through the roof, Sal? Again, I talked about this in a previous video, but I'll talk about it very quickly. When you look at rates and you see rates going around, there's a story right here from Marine Traffic that talks about this. People have locked in rates. People have, large shippers, people who ship a lot of goods, locked in their rates early, and so they have their rates. But those who spot charter, those who all of a sudden say, okay, I got to move this goods now. I hadn't planned on this, so I need to spot charter. I need to go ahead, do it. What they're hitting are these really high rates. Add to it, some contracts will prioritize some cargo over other cargo, so people get bumped down the list. If you want to get bumped to the top of the list, you got to pay a little bit extra. It's I want to get in that club. I'm going to pay a little bit more. I'm going to get to the front of the list. That's what's happening, and we're seeing rates escalate. We're seeing that rates. Plus, shippers have to pay more because ships are sitting there. Go back to Greg Miller's story. You're burning fuel. You're wasting time. You're not being productive. You're sitting off in an anchorage now. It's taking you longer to offload to clear the material off the dock, and that's slowing you down. And all those costs are not going to be absorbed by the carriers, the big shipping companies, especially the top 10, which are controlled 85% of the container traffic on the planet. They're going to pass that on to you, the consumer, and that's what we're seeing happening here. It was an interesting story. Greg Miller sat down with Gene Soroka. He's the head of the Port of Los Angeles. He did a Q&A with the U.S. Congress not too long ago, and he did his State of the Port not too long ago. And he was very optimistic, talking about clearing the port, but we're right back to where we were before. We've gotten right back. And understand, the Port of LA is constrained by a lot of issues that are not the Port of LA's fault. Railways, highways, truckers, chassis, all these issues are at play. There's also an issue here with labor, that they're working 2 shifts right now. They're not working 3 shifts. They're not going 24/7 in the Port of LA, but even if they were going 3 shifts, there would still be a problem because they can't get the cargo out. We just saw Union Pacific, for example, put a 2-week hiatus on moving containers out of the West Coast. We just saw the rail lines from California up into Washington severed because of wildfires. So we've got a lot of issues at play here. And if you want to read this really good interview that Greg did with Gene Soroka, Soroka is a consummate professional. He runs the Port of LA. It's the biggest port in the United States in terms of containers, not tonnage, but containers. And it's a really interesting discussion between the two. Again, I link all these articles into the show notes for you. At the same time, Q2, the second quarter is in, and if you invested in container ships, you're making money. I'm talking profits. I'm talking hauling money in right now. Maersk here is reporting record profits, revenue of $14.2 billion with an underlying EBITDA, which my acronyms are terrible. I apologize. This has to do with taxes and everything, of 5.1 billion, showing exceptionally heavy margins. All the companies are doing this: O&E, Hapag-Lloyd, MSC, you name it. I mean, they're all showing these record profits. And again, it's a big difference. I have to tell you that if you look from 2008 forward, container lines were squeaking by. The profit margin was pretty thin. And this is the trade in shipping. When shipping makes money, they make money big. They make money big. Most of the time, you're squeaking by trying to survive. But when the market comes, this is where you shovel in the money and you get it all you can. And that's what they're doing right now. But again, as I said in an earlier video, I think the container lines have learned how to control this much better than before. And I'm going to get to that in a second. You're having complaints against the big container lines. This is a story I talked about not too in the previous video, where a company, MCS Industries, Richard Master, the CEO, is a furniture company out of Pennsylvania, is filed a complaint with the Federal Maritime Commission because his contract with two shipping companies, Costco and MSC, is not being honored. He booked freight rates to move cargo, and he's being bumped. He's only getting a third of his cargo on MSC and 1.5% of his cargo on Costco that he was guaranteed. And so he has filed a complaint against the Federal Maritime Commission, against these companies, for not honoring it. I haven't looked at these contracts. These contracts are, as you can imagine, massive documents. And I'm sure there's some sort of provision that the companies are using to justify this. However, what you're seeing here, and I apologize for the salty language today, but you're seeing an American company get screwed by shipping companies. And this is something that we should all be concerned about. This is why there's a trade deficit right now in June so large, because cargo is getting bumped off vessels. The FMC, this is the head of the FMC right here. This is Daniel Maffei, responds to shipper complaints with probes into shipping. And again, there's been a probe into shipping since March. On March this year, March 2020. And I fully behind the FMC, Rebecca Dye, and all the group that's doing this probe. But it doesn't take a lot to figure out what's going on here, I got to tell you. And the thing that gets me the most about it is the reaction of the shipping companies. MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, shocked, I tell you, by shippers' antitrust complaint. One of my favorite movies of all time is Casablanca. And my favorite scene in the movie is when Humphrey Bogart and the French captain, Louis, is having their argument about closing down the cabaret. And he announced the reason he's closing the cabaret is because he's shocked to find out that gambling is going on, at which moment somebody walks out and hands him his winnings from gambling. This is the same thing right here. I'm shocked to find out that there's an antitrust complaint against MSC. Again, top 10 companies control 85% of the world's container spots on the ocean. 9 of those companies are in mega alliances, 3 mega alliances that control more of that. And the biggest one, the biggest mega alliance out there is the 2M alliance between Mediterranean Shipping Company and Maersk. These companies have consistently run out smaller companies, gobbled them up. And if you go to Container News and you look at their daily news feed, what you're seeing is increase in surcharges, increase in rates consistently by this. And when MSC is this shocked by this, it's important. There are 8 companies being investigated right now by the FMC. MSC is one of them. There's some that are not on that list, which really surprises me, I have to tell you. Maersk isn't on the list. Costco isn't on the list. But they're looking at 8 companies that are doing it. I think they should be looking at them all. I think you should be looking at them all. Listen, I'm a free market capitalist. I have no problem with companies making money. I have no problem at all. The problem I have is honoring your contracts and honoring your agreements to ship cargo. And when you're bumping American exports, you're making a lot of money off the United States in your imports. You have to give fair opportunity for American exports to get off. And Mafia, head of the FMC, noted in this story here in August that capacity demand won't recede until late 2022, not 2021, 2022. This issue is going to be going on for a while right now. And the shipping crisis of 2021 is going to morph and continue for quite a while. What does this mean? Well, made in China products are running into new logistics problems. One of the positive things that can come out of this is a realization that perhaps we should be focusing some production here in the United States. The reason we shifted everything south of the border, overseas, is because it was cheap. And one of the reasons it was cheap is because transportation was cheap. When you were charging $1,500 a box across the Pacific, it was cheap. I did a video where we talked about pears being shipped from Argentina to Thailand back to the United States to be packaged. Someone just opened up their refrigerator and saw a little package of pears that were grown in Argentina, packaged in Thailand, and they're opening it up in Washington, D.C. That means transportation costs don't exist. It's pennies on the package. Maybe now we start seeing that shift back over to this. I talk a lot about the U.S. merchant marine and why we should have a U.S. flagged merchant marine. And one of the reasons I think we should is so that we're not 100% dependent on foreign companies and foreign corporations for our trade. We always have this core capability in the United States. That should be the same, not just in shipping, but it should be the same in logistics and manufacturing, in trade. If we are 100% dependent on a commodity, an import, manufacturing from overseas, then we can't be surprised when situations like this happen and all of a sudden there's no toilet paper and paper towels on the shelves anymore. But it could be with something more strategic like chips, high-end electronics, material that we need for our everyday existence. And we do need toilet paper for everyday existence. I understand that entirely. Shipping snags prompt U.S. firms to mull out retreat from China. This is from the AP talking about this. I think companies are going to start thinking about this quite a lot. You may not make 100% shift away from China, but you may sit there and say, we need a core manufacturing capability, production element here in the United States that is not dependent on transportation across the oceans. Listen, we're never going to go away from this. We're never going to go away from this. We're a global economy. We're shipping over 11 billion tons of cargo every year. That's only going to grow. But the question is, do 100% of commodities and production reside completely overseas? Go on with this. This is a really interesting story. This one was going to go below the surface. No one's going to see this. But I have to tell you, of all the stories I read, this is the one that grabbed my attention the most. UCL becomes first carrier to launch a China U.S. East Coast Rail Sea Service. So OOCL, I should say, people get on mad for me for saying that. This is Orient Ocean Container Lines, subsidiary of Costco. I want to go in this story because it's a really interesting story for a second right here. The Costco subsidiary is offering a new combination of the Shanghai China-Europe block train service from Xi'an to Kaliningrad. Xi'an is in China. Kaliningrad, this is that little area that was a little detached part of Russia that's on the Baltic Sea, with onward feeder to Bremerhaven, and then with OOCL Ocean Services from Bremerhaven to various ports on the U.S. East Coast. Understand what this service is. They are loading stuff in Xi'an on trains going across Asia, Europe, to Kaliningrad for loading onto Bremerhaven ships to come across the Atlantic to the New York, Charleston, Savannah area. This is Belt and Road. This is what China's trying to do. They're trying to make it so that if you shut down the South China Sea down here, if they get blocked out of their ships going down the South China Sea, they can still trade overland. They can hit ports and terminals in the Indian Ocean. That's why they're developing ports in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. They're making agreements with lots of countries. This rail line across Central Asia is a key thing. They are looking to find alternate routes. They're already running from China through the Panama Canal up to the East Coast. That route is in full force, but this is a new route that they're developing. And this shows you the ability of China to basically find plan D should plan A not work. They are doing this quite a bit. And this demonstrates their ability to develop this land bridge and still access American, European markets should their oceanic trade routes be closed. That story to me is the most interesting right there. Finally, an interview with the CEO of Vespucci Maritime, Lars Jensen, who had been with Maersk. He gives an interview with Greg Miller. Greg's just knocking it out of the park right here with interviews. Beware nasty side effects of government targets ocean carriers. This is an interesting little warning here, a little shot across the bow to the investigations being done by the Federal Maritime Commission. Listen, government regulation is not the end all be all. Let me be 100% clear. I think government involvement in business tends to fail as much as it succeeds, maybe more. However, at times, even if you are a good reader of Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, remember the invisible hand is a hand. It's there to push things along. It's there to help things. And if you read what he writes about with ocean shipping, he talks about the fact that you need government intervention because you are on the international seas. You need some sort of government oversight. Again, you cannot compare the free market economy of the United States to the quote unquote free market economy of places like China, for example. China shipyards don't make profits. They barely make a fraction of a percentage of a profit because they don't have to. US companies do. They have shareholders. They need to make profits or else no one invests in them. And one of the biggest problems we have right now, and the reason why the US has no real major overseas international shipping like it did way back when in the, even the late 20th century, is because people are investing in markets where they're going to get profits. Why invest in shipping when I can invest in SpaceX, in Tesla, or better yet, in something that really doesn't exist, Bitcoin, Doge, and all that stuff, and make my profit and sell? That's the issue you have here. What Lars Jensen is talking about here is basically a couple of things. He's talking about that skyrocketing rates, and he's talking about the fact that there's profiteering accusations. Yeah, they're going to make money. Hats off to them. If you invest in a company, you want profits. I want my dividends from the stocks I invest in. He goes in here and talks about the alliances and consolidation. I don't think it's a good idea to break up the alliances and the consolidations. I really don't. I think if you break them up, that will cause more problems than it solves in the short term. I do think there's a problem that there's no American entity in that alliance or consolidation. I really do. The companies that had a U.S. lines in the 80s, Sealand in the early 2000s got gobbled up, and they were allowed to fall. Detention and demurrage abuse accusations. Let me be clear. This is happening. Companies are charging detention and demurrage. This is the holding of cargo, the lateness of cargo on shippers. Meanwhile, they're making record profits, and there needs to be an adjustment of that. Export service requirements. Yes, let me be clear. I am sorry. This is one I'm going to draw my line on. If you are profiting off delivering goods to the United States, you have to take out American exports. That's it. That's it. It's not a one-way service. You have to take out American exports, even if that means you're not taking the empty containers. And you need to be taking those exports. We need to be adamant about that. These companies are making money importing into the United States. They need to be taking exports, or they need to be fined some way so that that money can be used to foster ship construction, shipbuilding in the United States. all this story, again, goes back to what we were talking about way back in June. Again, I have a series of videos here. I'm more than happy for you to take a look at them. I've been doing this now since March, largely, although I had videos before that. But I've been talking about this since March. And it's really interesting to watch these stories unfold. Again, I don't expect all of you to make those connections. That's what I do. I like making those connections. And so we pulled together COVID, the Delta variant in the Far East, our trade imbalance, issues here in the United States, port congestion, rail, road, you name it, all kind of put together into this nice little package. So perhaps this video will help you better understand, so that when we have the next shortages that show up, and I'm not saying we're going to have them, I'm not saying that's good, that's what's looming, but we should be aware of it, that there's a potential for this to come down the road. You know, this is why we understand why there was not toilet paper and paper towels on the shelves back in the summer of 2020. There was no shortage of toilet paper and paper towels in the world. What there was a shortage of is that commodity on the shelves in the stores by you. Much like when the Colonial Pipeline shut down, there was no shortage of gasoline in the United States. There was a perceived shortage in the southeast part of the United States when there really wasn't a perceived shortage, because there was still oil and gasoline in tanks. Understanding these things is complicated. And it's not that it's complicated because you can't understand it. It's because there's so many moving parts that people don't watch. And so I hope this video unpacked that for you. If you enjoyed the video, if you are now freaked out about global shipping, then I guess my job is done. I don't mean to do that, but I do want to educate you in this area. My idea is as a college professor, is not indoctrinate, is to educate. And so hopefully I did that with this video. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come up. Share it on social media, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. I try to answer all my comments as soon as I can. It's been a busy week going on, getting ready for the start of a new semester, and my new job is chair of the Department of History, Criminal Justice, and Political Science at Campbell, so I may not be able to get videos out as frequent, but I'm going to try. And I look forward to hearing from you and to the next video. So until next time, Sal signing off.